Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. I'm going to start out today by just saying the author's name, Francisco X. Stork. The X is for Xavier. And Mr. Stork has written now 4 novels, all for young readers. And the novel we're going to talk about the most today is called Marcelo in the Real World. But we're also going to talk about a book that's not available yet, on the way, called The Last Summer of the Death Warriors. Both these books are what they call in the biz Arthur A. Levine books, very important. And they're published by Scholastic. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for stopping by. One of the things I want to talk to you about is recently you won an award, and I'll read it very carefully. It's called the Schneider Family Book Award, given to you at the American Library Association midwinter meeting, which was held in New Orleans.
Boston, actually.
Oh, in Boston. You just walk across the street and get your award. And this is an award for the most distinguished portrayal of people living with a disabling condition in literature for children. That's quite an award.
It is. I would say I was quite a surprise to get that award, actually.
But you don't sit down and say, I'm going to write to get an award? You don't do that?
No, I don't. I think that, when the intentions of writing a book are always to write the best work that you can write, but awards are really something that happen or may not happen, but they're not in the foremost of my mind when I write a book.
Yeah. But the awards are something that you don't write for, and I think that in your case, it perhaps takes you, or it's kind of similar to the situation pre-publication. You were one of those people who wrote journals and journals and journals, aren't you?
That's right. I started writing journals when I was in high school, and that was something that I wrote every day. I acquired this habit of throwing everything into a journal, poems, short stories, just thoughts, emotions, lists, and over the years it became something that I just needed to do until when I was 45 years old, I was able to transform writing into journals into writing fiction.
Yeah, in your bio sheet it says, at Harvard you studied Latin American lit with people like Octavio Paz, the Mexican Nobel laureate. However, the emphasis on scholarly research and writing seemed too remote and irrelevant to all that it was important and going on in the world. So you spent 4 years at Harvard, and then you went to Columbia Law School.
That's right. Well, somebody has to make a living somehow.
Yeah. And your plan, it says here, was to make a living as a lawyer without abandoning his plan to write fiction. 20 years and 12 or so legal jobs later, Francisco published his first novel. Yay!
I got sidetracked a little bit.
Well, it isn't a cautionary tale because it is, in many ways, the story of most writers. It takes time for most writers to get published.
And it takes time, I think, to sort of realize that the vocation of a writer is something that takes a long time to develop. And for in some ways it takes, for some people it takes longer than others. I see some young writers who right off college who publish bestsellers, and I look at them and I say, my goodness, how did that happen?
They're freaks. That's
how do they do that?
No, those people are freaks. That's what they are. Now, getting back to the award. You wrote about people with disabling conditions. Now, let's focus on Marcelo and what his disabling condition is.
Marcelo has a Asperger syndrome, which is a cognitive disorder on the high end of the autism spectrum. And people with Asperger syndrome can be very intelligent. Usually they have a higher IQ than most of us, but they have problems in the areas of communication and social interaction. they also typically would have like a very special interest that they would, or have areas of special interest that they're very almost obsessed about, in which they become quite the experts on.
Is it right to say that he has two special interest areas, one being internal music and the other being scripture or the Bible or religion?
Religion would be, I think religion would be what he would call his special interest. The internal music, I think, is just something that happens to him. He's the recipient of it, whereas I think the religious interest is something that he cultivates. So there's a slight difference there, I would say.
Though he's Catholic or appears to be Catholic, he pursues his religion study, if you will, with a woman rabbi.
And that's because his interest in religion is really religion in the broad sense, not necessarily not in the small institutional sense, but really his concern is with basically the what's universal about all religions, and so he's into Buddhism. He's into he talks to a rabbi every week to make sure that to discuss his studies, and he has a very broad interest in all areas.
She's a strong figure too. I mean, the way I read her.
She's a very strong figure, and she's in many ways represents for Marcelo sort of a guidance force. When Marcelo begins to falter in his faith at some point, she's there to reaffirm his where he's going wrong.
Mm-hmm. Marcelo in the Real World takes us many places inside two kinds of law firms, the hills of Vermont. And we'll be off and running to those kind of places in a minute. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at JimFosterCoc or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Marcelo in the Real World, the last summer of the Death Warriors. They're both Arthur A. Levine books published by Scholastic. The author, Francisco X. Stork, is here. And Sarah
Sar,
yes, had this to say about the book. Oh, dear. Marcelo in the Real World is mesmerizing, a coming-of-age story in the realist sense, leaving the Eden of childhood and awakening to the knowledge of good and evil, both outside and inside. That's what Marcelo is all about. And he is asked, to leave the comfort zone that he's been living in, and in his father's phrase, get involved in the real world. But there's something about Marcelo, at least that I got. We talked in the first segment about his having a kind of deficit, a knowledge deficit. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's true. I think the way he knows things is better than the way most persons know things. He approaches everything with a kind of hesitancy but reverence, and he's very, very careful in what he thinks about, and certainly in how he expresses himself. It takes time, so I suppose, for him to do things.
Right.
And I suppose that's the deficit. But by golly, as I read on and on, I kept saying to myself, this kid really, really knows how to know.
Yeah, I think that the deficit is not so much in his in the way that he thinks or in the way that he perceives the world, but rather it's in what probably the deficit is in the way society looks at Marcelo. And
precisely,
I think that some of the values that Marcelo exemplifies are not valued by our modern world, and so there's a certain irony there that there's this highly intelligent young man who, in many ways, we would like to emulate. but who is having trouble fitting into the world because of the way that we are these days.
Yeah, and he's trying to get into the real world in the context of a hotshot law firm, where everything has to be done yesterday in 5 copies, and yet he does it. He perseveres.
Well, he manages. He does it with some help. He has a co-worker in the mailroom, Jasmine, who sort of understands him and is able to create a space for him to work at his own pace, to the extent that that's possible in the law firm. But and he also Marcelo manages to figure out little strategies to make it work.
To make it work.
So
there's another kind of law firm in the story, unlike the one that his father is the big co-partner in, run by a fellow graduate of Harvard, Jerry Garcia. Contrast those 2 law firms. I mean, Garcia's is funny.
Well, Jerry Garcia is the public defender guy. He's out there, probably driving under the influence cases and helping people not get kicked out of their apartments and probably accepting little fees. And so he's kind of the ideal, lawyer type of doing good.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was like going and waiting for a bus. The office was crowded. There were not enough seats and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And his personal office was never mind. I mean, forget it. And his secretary walked out 2 weeks before.
So he's both secretary, filing clerk, lawyer, and everything else.
One of the interesting things, and this just dawned on me this morning when you were talking to those students down in San Bruno, that the father says, I'm going to introduce you to the real world. And yet the father character does not play the heavy part of that introduction. It's left to a nasty young fellow by the name of Wendell. It just dawned on me this morning that Wendell's the heavy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's Wendell is a character. Is one of the son of another partner at the law firm that basically exemplifies in many ways what's the spoiled kind of rich young man who is out to get whatever he can for himself, and he tries to manipulate Marcelo into getting Jasmine, the beautiful Jasmine, Marcelo's co-worker at the mailroom, to fall in love with him. To fall in love with Wendell, or to go out with him anyway.
To go out with him.
Yeah, I guess she
on the boat.
On the boat with Wendell. But so Wendell is really kind of like the first time that Marcelo kind of encounters evil, if you will. And through Wendell, I think, which is a very strong character, I think, to a world that he had never encountered before.
Yeah, he's the one who does the job of introducing, and Arturo, the father, stands off to the side, somewhat innocent until a certain letter is found. But we're not going to give that away. We're going to take a pause now, and when we come back, I promise we're going to talk about the book The Last Summer of the Death Warriors, which is not going to be available until next month. Don't miss it.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Conversations on the Coast. Joining us today, Francisco X. Stork. I love to say that, X. I really do. I like that a lot. He's written 4 books. We're talking about 2 of them. We've been spending most of our time talking about Marcelo in the real world, about which, and I don't want to leave the subject without talking about what the New York Times Book Review said. In the skillful hands of Francisco X. Stork, see, the Times does it right, 17-year-old Marcelo Sandoval is the bravest, most original hero I've met in years. I agree. A brisk, brilliant, unsentimental novel. It gets almost sentimental in Vermont, in my opinion. But in total,
Yes.
it's not. It's not sentimental. It is unsentimental. And we all get a trip into the real world. Great book.
Thank you very much.
Then comes The Last Summer of the Death Warriors. I thought there was going to be, guys in uniform with bullets and guns and stuff like that. That's not what the Death Warriors are all about. What are they about?
Well, the Death Warriors is really it's a story of two young men. We have a Chicano young man who has recently lost his sister, who he thought was murdered, and is out to avenge her death. He's an orphan, so he gets placed in an orphanage where he meets DQ.
DQ.
The Chicano's boy's name is Pancho, and Pancho and DQ.
DQ stands for David Quentin.
Quentin.
Like in the prison, San Quentin.
So Pancho is assigned to be DQ's assistant, and DQ is a kind of a philosopher type, very intelligent young man who has brain cancer, and together they form this pair of very kind of different personalities, and the book is really kind of about the relationship and the transforming power of a friendship over time, and how different characters become sort of like each other as time progresses.
Mm-hmm.
But Death Warriors refers to DQ's manifesto that he's writing, a manifesto of how to live your life the right way. And Death Warriors is a
how to live your life the right way in the face of a death-threatening illness.
Right.
And the other thing about, the way you describe it, he's in a wheelchair.
Yes.
For the most part. But he's not in a wheelchair because he can't walk. Why is he in a wheelchair?
Well, he's a lot of the times he's just weak from the.
Yeah, but it's not that his legs are bad. It's just whatever he has invaded his entire system.
Right.
And that's devastating. And for him to say, well, it ain't over, we got things to do is amazing.
Yes. He's a quite, the one of the things that is interesting about the relationship is that the different types of courage that each of the boys has. One of them, Pancho, is more of a kind of a macho, kind of violent type of courage, and DQ is a more subdued, subtle kind of survival type of courage, and how and they both learn from each other.
Yeah, and even with those very different approaches to life, if you will, friendship blooms. Blooms is it ain't that easy.
It takes a while.
These two guys.
Yeah.
With these two guys. Now there's, as we say in the biz, there's a love interest. Marisol, is that her name? The woman that they both like.
Marisol is a in one of the trips to Albuquerque, where the story takes place. To the DQ meets this beautiful young lady who's there in kind of the home where kids stay while they're getting treatments. And when he returns with Pancho, one of his wishes is to love her, and to have her love be reciprocated, or his love be reciprocated. And it so happens that Pancho also falls in love with Marisol, and so there's this dynamic that is going on between the DQ who is ill, and Pancho who's very vibrant, and Marisol being the object of both of their desires.
This is a tale, isn't it, of intrigue you've woven here.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. There's a place that they reside at least some of the time, called St. Anthony's, and I know at the end of the book, which I peeked at, they're back. I think they're back at St. Anthony's.
St. Anthony's is the orphanage where they start off from. It's a place in Las Cruces. The place takes in South. The story takes place in both Las Cruces and Albuquerque, New Mexico. Places that I'm familiar with in terms where I grew up in El Paso, Texas. So it's a landscape that I love, and it has a lot of meaning. The desert and the mountains, and it's
an area also now famous for advanced or off the wall cancer treatments.
Yeah. And there's some of that goes on. In DQ's mother wants him to try try everything, and DQ is kind of more concerned about the quality of life. So there's some of that goes on in the story. But St. Anthony's is the place where the story begins, and where the boys return at the end of the story as well.
Yeah.
So did I give the ending away? No.
Not yet. And we're almost running out of time here. And before we do, let me remind you that today we have been talking on Conversations on the Coast to the wonderful Francisco X. Stork, the author of The Last Summer of the Death Warriors, which you're not going to be able to get anywhere except you hear about it on this program, until next month. And the marvelous, wonderful, best-selling, award-winning Marcelo in the Real World. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.